Hello everyone and welcome back. This is John from firstreview.co.uk, and today we're looking at an interesting paper that's just dropped last month, which is called The Impact of Aging on Maximal Oxygen Uptake, Adjusting for Lower Limb Lean Mass, that's a hard one to say, total mass and the absolute value in runners. So this is a very interesting study looking at the effect of VO2 max, effectively what it's talking about here, and the effect on aging. Now, some of the results here aren't a total surprise, but the key concepts for this are interesting in relation to how, if you're a trainer or if you're a coach or if you're someone that does their own fitness, their own training plans and stuff like that, how you would adjust depending upon age for yourself in terms of running performance and endurance. So some of the key concepts here is looking at things like body composition, cardiac output, anaerobic thresholds, like I say, VO2 max, distance, muscle, and respiratory gas exchange as well, to see what that ratio looks like. So let's just dive a little bit in here. We'll have a little bit look about what we're talking about. So what they were looking at here was, does the central conditions of absolute weight adjusted maximal oxygen uptake, VO2 max, matter more or less than lower limb lean mass and ventilatory threshold and RCP, which is respiratory compensation point. The respiratory compensation point is, in a sentence, is where your intensity is increased enough to where you have excess CO2 basically. So it's whether or not that actually makes a difference depending on your age and your running. So who did they do this on? So they did this on 78 males, recreational long distance runners, were divided into two groups depending upon age. The first group was around 38 years of age, plus or minus 6 years, and the second group was 57, plus or minus 6 years. So two relatively far apart groups, which is quite nice to see. Obviously this is looking at the aging process, so it's looking at runners that are getting into the masters category, which is a growing category here in the UK. More and more people are entering marathons and 5k races, 10k races that are would be classed in the masters category than ever before. So we're seeing a lot of people take running longer and later into their life, whether they're doing this for fun or they're doing this for competitive reasons. That's who's to say, but certainly they're carrying running, which you can do later into your life. So this is why it's interesting to look at your VO2 max and your oxygen consumption from that, because if you want to run and you want to run for long distances, you have to adjust your training to where your body is at basically, and this is looking at what key aspects of where your body is at is you need to be looking at for that adjustment in your training, which I think is definitely valid. We know one size doesn't fit all, and so we know looking at these kind of variables do help with us to plan our training. So there is interesting look here from the authors. They, like I say, they recommend further research implementing longitudinal studies to establish these variables over a bigger space of time. I suppose it'd be interesting to see this from looking at between 38 and then say 58. So they're looking at almost a 30, a good span of time, give a few decades of time. It'd be nice to go the other way and go to 28, 38. See where that cascade is, how much of a drop off and what early parts of your life do you need to be thinking about adjusting training plans from when you're younger and you're fit and you can run for hours and not feel it and not gas out, to when you need to adjust so you can keep training for longer and racing for longer in terms of your running ability basically. So let's look at some of the highlights here that I have rounded up for you guys. It's well known that the fact that performance for long distance runners events decreases as the increasing age in humans, which is a well-known fact that the older you get, you're going to see a drop off in performance at some point. No one's going to perform at their best later and later into life, so that's not surprising, but it's an interesting thing to highlight here that you can't fight Father Time, as it were, that that's always going to get you at some point. The interesting thing, there was no real big difference between the groups when we look at ventilation thresholds and when we looked at respiratory consumption points. So these do adjust to age, but they're not impacted by aging in the same way as more central conditions such as cardiovascular ones do, where there was a difference. So there is a small variables when it comes to adjusting for your training when you're looking at these variables of your intensity, your CO2 buildup, your ventilation threshold. These are all things that, relatively speaking, are going to stay the same thing if you're trying to train that for better endurance and better running. The hypothesis here was looking at the variables that are limiting aid by aging in terms of central conditions of things like total body weight, VO2 max values, comparatively against the lean mass for VO2 max values, and ventilation and RCP. So this hypothesis, basically, the long and short of it, was kind of proven that yes, when you look at your training plans and adjustment for training and coaches over time with an aging athlete, you need to be looking at more of the total mass VO2 rather than the lower limb lean mass VO2 max parameters, because the total mass is what's important for improving your performance in terms of endurance running. So very interesting there. What else? Similar to lower leg lean mass adjusted VO2 max, percentage of VO2 max that can be sustained is primarily associated with the muscular condition. So you've got good muscles, you'll have good lean mass. If you've been running, you've probably got good quads because you've been picking up those legs for a bunch of times over miles. So you're going to have good lower leg lean mass, which doesn't indicate how you need to be training for your VO2 max, which is your total body weight, which is more beneficial to you if you're an aging athlete or getting older as an athlete, should I say. These studies suggest that this is the condition you need to be looking at rather than the peripheral conditions of things like your lower leg lean mass and your ventilation thresholds, all the rest of it. There was some limitations to this cross-sectional design of the study, but these findings did prove useful in the understanding of the effect of aging and the physiological parameters of anaerobic performance, and for the development of training programs interventions for runners, especially in the masters category, who, like I say, are a growing category of athlete that are competing in recreational running. And you'll see that cascade up into competitions where there's a demand for that category, and that category will grow. So there were some limitations here, and it's not completely clear of where you need to be placing your training. But in terms of if you are getting on in life, if you are aging, if you're not a 18-year-old who runs for days, then the things you need to be looking at for your anaerobic performance is your total body VO2 max and how that places depending upon your age and all the rest of it. So in summary, is there anything we need to be looking at? No, not really. Like the summary, let's look at my comparative analysis on this. Let's look at some things here. The study did emphasize the importance of considering central and peripheral conditions determining the effect of aging and running performance variables on the resource for developing age evidence-based training and testing innovation for runners at different ages and experience levels. So this basically, what I'm trying to say there is that this study did emphasize that when you're developing an evidence-based training strategy for your client, for your runner, if you're a coach, if you're a PT or whatever it may be, that these interventions are important to consider for the age and the experience level of the athlete. It's important to look at these parameters, that being total body weight, VO2 max, rather than ventilation thresholds, lower limb mass, VO2 maxes and stuff like that. that's another thing that's important to remember. VO2 max reflects on the individual's anaerobic capacity, which is a key indicator of physical fitness. Therefore, this kind of confirms that hypothesis which I was just talking about, that if you're aging, you're getting older, and your experience level, you need to be looking at total body VO2 max. What other thing was worth? I highlight something in the discussion bit here. Yeah, so like, although these systems are all affected by VO2 max, the cardiovascular system is going to be the one that really is the central hub for your total body VO2 max. So as you get older and your experience level of your athlete, the cardiovascular system is where you need to be putting more time and energy into understanding for your training program. This is where you start to get into the heart zones and stuff. So maybe heart zones don't really apply so much when you're younger, but apply the older you get. So you can kind of understand how to be training that aerobic capacity in the body. One thing I did note here, there was a significant difference of VO2 relevant to the body mass between the two groups with what we're expecting. Again, trying to prove the hypothesis this paper's talking about. What was interesting in this study actually was that the men in this study that were between 50 and 55 years of age actually had a 46 milliliter VO2 max compared to the value of 51 that is of average for someone that's 50 to 55. So actually these people that were recreational runners and probably are running a long time into their life actually had a better VO2 max than the average for their age. So again, that shows an interesting parameter that actually they performed well and similar to the younger group, but they are actually probably fitter than most people in that age category, and so that it closes that gap. So again, looks at total body VO2 max as being an important parameter there. So yeah, in kind of total there, I've broken down the study. There's not huge holes in it. It is a cross-sectional study and it is reasonably well designed. There are some problems when doing studies like this. It is over a short period of time that they did this. A longitudinal study would be interesting. Again, going down in age and up in age a bit more would be interesting to see where that drop off is. But it's interesting that when you're looking after your coach, if you've got a coach, you've got a client that you're coaching, and for running, you want to be looking at total VO2 max to break that down and improve overall. So I hope you found that interesting. I hope you found this breakdown of the study was relevant for you. If you're an aging athlete out there, look at your total VO2 max. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed that. Before you go, make sure to do that great stuff, subscribe, like, and all that stuff for the algorithm, and make sure to go to my website or social media and go to First We Breathe and follow me there and sign up for my newsletter, The Insider Advantage, which is probably the best newsletter on breathing out there on the internet if I do say so myself. So go sign up and check that out.